up to quite a lot of state orthodoxy as it happens.
And so would you feel this makes a weaker parliament for us and a weak parliament?
Oh, it's a weaker Britain, because this isn't just some phenomenon that comes out of Parliament. It isn't that parliamentarians take every word out, look at it and then put it back in their mouths and utter it. It isn't just parliamentarians. It's the entire of Britain. People are just... The number of times that you will hear in a week somebody say, I suppose one shouldn't say this today, but... we've suddenly become oppressed by this wretched orthodoxy to which we must all subscribe, or pretend we do, or keep quiet. No, there is a fourth option, which is to speak against it.
Do you think there are enough people doing that today, or are we sliding down into that realm where everything that becomes we shouldn't do it, we just don't do it, and therefore it becomes the
we're
norm?
On the slide.
Yes.
We're on a very precipitous slope towards that.
I made that slip in the opening, Minister of State for Religion.
I expect some of my colleagues think that's exactly what I was.
And of course, actually, when I was practicing earlier, every second time I made that, and I thought I mustn't make it, and of course that's why you do it. But there is a reason, of course, to associate you very much with religion and with spiritual things. What part has the spiritual life as a Christian played in your political life?
Oh, I mean, if you're a Christian, it's going to play a part in all aspects of your life, and you can't just say this is politics, that's Christianity, and there the twain shall meet. Quite clearly, there's going to be a huge impact. Very often people say to me, Anne, why do you make such a thing of your religion? Why don't you keep it private? Religion's a private matter. And I say, well, first of all, St. Paul said, we believe and therefore speak. And secondly, rather more importantly, Christ said, hide not thy light under a bushel. And my enemies have accused me of many things in my lifetime, but never yet of hiding my light under a bushel. And I also think in a democracy, people do need to know what motivates the people who are standing for election. What are they likely to do? What are their stands on various issues? I've never concealed a stand in my life from a constituent because I was worried about a vote. I've always said exactly what I stand for. And then I say, if you don't like it, your remedy is in the ballot box.
Would you look back in your spiritual life, in your Christian life, and see a moment of conversion, call it a born-again experience or whatever?
No.
Or is this something which you've just grown up with?
It's more than that, but the evangelical view is that there is which I grew up with at home because my brother was an evangelical vicar, that was the view that was held, was that there is a specific moment in your life when you turn to Christ. I say that can indeed happen. But it is also possible for that to almost creep up on you unawares. You don't wake up one morning and... Sorry. You don't wake up one morning and realise that everything's changed from the day before. But this is something that you gradually grow into. A lot of convictions in life come that way. And one moment you believe something, and a couple of years later you believe something different, and it's only when you look back that you suddenly say, oh yes, I've changed my mind on that, but the process was almost invisible. And I always I went through a period of agnosticism when I was older, and I always describe the becoming an agnostic as a very gradual erosion of belief, and coming back from agnosticism as a very gradual erosion of unbelief, but gradual. And it isn't necessary, I think, to point to one moment. Now, when I was 8, I was taken to a Christian rally in Tunbridge Wells by my brother. And afterwards they said to me, do you want to give your heart to the Lord Jesus? Well, if you ask a child that and put it on the spot, what's it going to say? So I said, yes. And thereafter it was held that this was my moment of conversion. I don't believe that. I think that it was a very much slower process, but one which became a fiercely strong conviction.
And part of your early education was in a Catholic convent.
Yes.
You then joined the Church of England, And then...
Well, no, I'd been a member of the Church of England from birth.
Okay,
yeah,
so fine, yeah. So, but you began to practice your Christianity in there. And then in 1993, of course, you made this big decision to go to Catholicism. Can you explain how that decision came about and what that meant to you?
Again, it was one of those very gradual processes which had been creeping up on me for a while. During that period when I was an agnostic, I observed the church from afar. And I noticed that whereas the Anglican Church blew about with every little gust of wind, the Roman Church actually took the opposite line, and it was summed up in the encyclical, which was not then out, which came out a few months after I was converted, which says that it's called Veritatis Splendor, the shining of truth. And it says the essence of it is that something can be very popular and wrong, and something can be profoundly unpopular and right. And that was the stand that the Catholics took, and the view of the Vatican was, didn't matter whether something was fashionable, didn't matter if nobody agreed. If that was an eternal verity, that was an eternal verity, full stop. When I came back from agnosticism, I came back to the Anglican Church because my roots were hugely deep in it. My uncle was a vicar, my brother was a vicar, my grandfather was a lay reader. Since then, my little nephew's become a vicar. Sometimes I think the Widdecombe's exist to keep the Church of England in vicars. So I had a hugely deep Anglican roots, but gradually I faced what I'd seen. And there were lots of straws. I was carrying a huge bundle of straw, but the final one was when the Church of England decided to ordain women. And the nature of the debate that took place in Synod was not, is this theologically possible? But it was led by the Archbishop himself. If we don't do this, we won't be acceptable to the modern world. And my view was, no, hang on. The Church leads, it doesn't follow. And that was it. That was the final straw which sent me across the Tiber.
It's very interesting because what you were describing there is very much, of course, your personality all the way through. It didn't matter whether it was popular, it's a question of whether it was right or not. And you've mentioned the ordination of women, which you say was not looked upon in any theological way. Were there any theological reasons with those straws? Did you feel that some of the things you've been taught weren't true, and or was it just an...
I mean, take as you've just said, the ordination of women. Now, I wanted to see a theological debate. That's what I wanted the Synod to do. And I wanted the answer as to why Christ didn't appoint a single woman apostle, and yet priests are part of the apostolic succession. I wanted an answer to how a woman can stand in persona Christi at the point of consecration. I wanted all those answers. And they didn't come because all we were talking about was what the modern world would expect. So certainly I've always looked at things theologically, but yes, you're quite right. I used to regard, for example, I was brought up to regard confessing sins to a priest as somehow diminishing Christ's role. Then, of course, you look at Holy Writ and you say, and whosoever sins thou shalt forgive shall be forgiven. And you think, hang on, Christ is actually giving an authority here. How have I missed that all these years? And when I started to approach Scripture with an open mind, I found much there that I thought, yeah, that's Catholicism. Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I shall build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. But then, crucially, whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shalt be bound in heaven. It's the infallibility argument.
And so, looking at that, you look towards Rome. Did you ever consider any of the non-conformists, any of the free churches, or
no? I wanted an apostolic church.
Right.
I did look very, very briefly at the Orthodox, but it was only a brief look. I wanted an apostolic church. I did for a while consider simply being not in communion with the Church of England, but going to the more traditional Anglican churches, what you might call the 1662 Anglican churches. And then I thought, no, that's a cop-out. I didn't go to Rome immediately. I think a lot of people think I left the Church of England one day, I became a Roman Catholic the next. In fact, there were 4 months, 5 months in between, because I had to resolve any doctrinal doubts that I had held. Because there is a statement that you make when you're received into the Catholic Church, which you make out loud and individually. I believe all the Church teaches to be revealed truth. Well, if you can't say that, then either you commit a major act of perjury at the point of reception or you don't get received. So it is crucial to resolve any problems which you've got, and that's what that period of what they call catechesis is about.
And you had no problems. You felt, even coming, obviously, with your brother, with the evangelical Anglican Church background, you felt, no, there were no problems with Catholic doctrine. You faced them and...
In the end, I faced them and resolved them, yeah. In a way, it's a bit of a lazy thing, because I'd always been brought up to believe, this is true, that's false, had tended to accept the teaching that I had at home, but always retained in my mind what I'd heard at school, because in those days, and it sounds incredible now, but in those days there wasn't actually an ecumenical movement. And the two churches regarded each other as having two horns and a tail, quite honestly. And I was taught at home that the Catholics believed this, and I was taught at school that the Anglicans believed that, and it was all rot. They'd all got it wrong. Didn't know what each other believed. And so I did have that huge advantage from an early age of seeing both sides as they truly were, as opposed to what you were being taught by the other side. And it occurred to me in that transition. I thought I'd been lazy all my life. I've elected Anglicanism without ever really challenging it. And the more I challenged myself, the more I came to the conclusion that Catholicism had to be right.
You've mentioned Malcolm, your brother,
yes.
and because I preached at Pip and Jane, I'm sure a lot of our viewers will have known him, and because he died a few months ago. What was his reaction to you going to Rome? Did he support it?
He was absolutely in favour. He actually came up and he took part in my ceremony of reception, actually played a part in that ceremony, because he was as fed up with the Church of England as I was, but unlike me, first of all, he had a flock to look after. And secondly, he had nowhere to go, because he did not accept Rome's doctrines, so he had nowhere to go. And so he stayed. But he thoroughly sympathised with the people who were going.
And so, just finally, as it were, on the spiritual side of things, your spiritual life, as we've talked about, has meant something to you all through your life. Even now, it's a major part of what you do and how you think and what you are aiming for still.
I don't know that I'm aiming for anything very specific at the moment. I'm in one of those glorious phases when you take no heed of tomorrow, for tomorrow takes care of itself, you know. The great thing about being retired is you're not trying to construct a career, you're not assessing offers in terms of opportunities and all this sort of stuff. And I took Strictly because I thought it would be fun. I took the live tour because I thought it would be fun. I've taken Panto because I thought it would be fun. I've done 2 documentaries. One is a serious one on the state of Christianity today, which will be out in Holy Week on BBC. And the other is a rather whimsical radio documentary on Father Brown, the detective priest, because it is the 100th anniversary of the first Father Brown story in early May. So we've done an analysis of Father Brown. You know, did Father Brown convert Keith Chesterton, that sort of thing, Gilbert Keith Chesterton. I'm just looking, and what comes I may take or not take.
You're still very much associated in people's minds with the political scene, even though you're not there. And of course, when David Cameron became leader of the Conservative Party, you had some very real problems over that. Have you changed your mind
I didn't
since?
have very real problems. What I said at the time of the leadership election, when we had to make choices and we had to make assessments between the various candidates, was that I thought he was too young and too inexperienced, and I preferred somebody like Ken Clarke, who'd been around the block many, many times, because we were in a pretty parlous state, and we'd been in opposition for rather a long time, and we'd experimented, you know, and we'd got it wrong. And I wanted somebody who'd been there, seen it all, done it, got the T-shirt. That was my view at the time. I don't describe those as serious problems. I was making a judgment between candidates. That was my view. From the moment that David Cameron was elected, I wished him well, because I do always wish, even when it was Michael Howard, the leader of the Conservative Party, well. And I have continued to wish him well. And I think many of the things he's done are right. But I hope he will show courage over the NHS reforms and not back off, because I think if we're going to deliver health properly in